Chapter 6. As the Hindu paused in his story, he saw that de Marigny and Phillips were watching him absorbedly. Aspinwall pretended to ignore the narrative and kept his eyes ostentatiously on the papers before him. The alien-rhythmed ticking of the coffin-shaped clock took on a new and portentous meaning, while the fumes from the choked, neglected tripods wove themselves into fantastic and inexplicable shapes, and formed disturbing combinations with the grotesque figures of the draft-swayed tapestries. The old Negro who had tended them was gone. Perhaps some growing tension had frightened him out of the house. An almost apologetic hesitancy hampered the speaker as he resumed in his oddly labored yet idiomatic voice. "You have found these things of the abyss hard to believe," he said, "but you will find the tangible and material things ahead still harder. That is the way of our minds. Marvels are doubly incredible when brought into 3 dimensions from the vague regions of possible dream. I shall not try to tell you much. That would be another and very different story. I will tell only what you absolutely have to know." Carter, after that final vortex of alien and polychromatic rhythm, had found himself in what for a moment he thought was his old insistent dream. He was, as many a night before, walking amidst throngs of snouted beings through the streets of a labyrinth of inexplicably fashioned metal under a blaze of diverse solar color, and as he looked down he saw that his body was like those of the others, rugose, partly squamous and curiously articulated in a fashion mainly insect-like yet not without a caricaturish resemblance to the human outline. The silver key was still in his grasp, though held by a noxious-looking claw. In another moment the dream sense vanished, and he felt rather as one just awakened from a dream. The ultimate abyss, the being, the entity of absurd, outlandish race called Randolph Carter on a world of the future not yet born. Some of these things were parts of the persistent recurrent dreams of the wizards at Corbra on the planet Yadith. They were too persistent. They interfered with his duties in weaving spells to keep the frightful dolls in their burrows, and became mixed up with his recollections of the myriad real worlds he had visited in light beam envelopes. And now they had become quasi-real as never before. This heavy, material silver key in his right upper claw, exact image of one he had dreamt about, meant no good. He must rest and reflect, and consult the tablets of Enhing for advice on what to do. Climbing a metal wall in a lane off the main concourse, he entered his apartment and approached the rack of tablets. 7 day fractions later, Zedcorber squatted on his prism in awe and half despair, for the truth had opened up a new and conflicting set of memories. Nevermore could he know the peace of being one entity. For all time and space he was to Zedcorber the Wizard of Yadith, disgusted with the thought of the repellent Earth mammal Carter that he was to be and had been, and Randolph Carter of Boston on the Earth, shivering with fright at the clawed, snouted thing which he had once been and had become again. The time units spent on Yadith, croaked the swarmy, whose labored voice was beginning to show signs of fatigue, made a tale in themselves which could not be related in brief compass. There were trips to Stronti and Emthoror and Cath, and other worlds in the 28 galaxies accessible to the light beam envelopes of the creatures of Yadith, and trips back and forth through eons of time with the aid of the silver key and various other symbols known to Yadith's wizards. There were hideous struggles with the bleached viscous stoles in the primal tunnels that honeycombed the planet. There were org sessions in libraries amongst the mass lore of 10,000 worlds living and dead. There were tense conferences with other minds of Yadith, including that of the Archancient Bureau. Zedcorber told no one of what had befallen his personality, But when the Randolph Carter facet was uppermost, he would study furiously every possible means of returning to the Earth and to human form, and would desperately practice human speech with the alien throat organs so ill-adapted to it. The Carter facet had soon learned with horror that the SilverKey was unable to effect his return to human form. It was, as he deduced too late from things he remembered, things he dreamed, and things he inferred from the lore of Yadith, a product of Hyperborea on Earth, with power over the personal consciousness symbols of human beings alone. It could, however, change the planetary angle and send the user at will through time in an unchanged body. There had been an added spell which gave it limitless powers it otherwise lacked, but this, too, was a human discovery, peculiar to a spatially unreachable region, not to be duplicated by the wizards of Yadith. It had been written on the undecipherable parchment in the hideously carven box with the SilverKey, and Carter bitterly lamented that he had left it behind. The now inaccessible being of the abyss had warned him to be sure of his symbols, and had doubtless thought he lacked nothing. As time wore on, he strove harder and harder to utilize the monstrous lore of Yadith in finding a way back to the abyss and the omnipotent entity. With his new knowledge, he could have done much toward reading the cryptic parchment, but that power under present conditions was merely ironic. There were times, however, when the Z-Cobra facet was uppermost, and when he strove to erase the conflicting Carter memories which troubled him. Thus long spaces of time wore on, ages longer than the brain of man could grasp. Since the beings of Yadith die only after prolonged cycles, after many hundreds of revolutions, the Carter facets seemed to gain on the Z-Cobra facet, and would spend vast periods calculating the distance of Yadith in space and time from the human Earth that was to be. The figures were staggering, eons of light years beyond counting, but the immemorial lore of Yadith fitted Carter to grasp such things. He cultivated the power of dreaming himself momentarily earthward, and learned many things about our planet that he had never known before. But he could not dream the needed formula on the missing parchment. Then at last he conceived a wild plan of escape from Yadith, which began when he found a drug that would keep his Z-Cobra facet always dormant, yet without dissolution of the knowledge and memories of Z-Cobra. He thought that his calculations would let him perform a voyage with a light-wave envelope such as no being of Yadith had ever performed, a bodily voyage through nameless eons and across incredible galactic reaches to the solar system and the Earth itself. Once on Earth, though in the body of a clawed-snouted thing, he might be able somehow to find and finish deciphering the strangely hieroglyphed parchment he had left in the car at Arkham, and with its aid and the keys, resume his normal terrestrial semblance. He was not blind to the perils of the attempt. He knew that when he had brought the planet Tangle to the right eon, a thing impossible to do while hurtling through space, Yadith would be a dead world dominated by triumphant dolls, and that his escape in the light-wave envelope would be a matter of grave doubt. Likewise was he aware of how he must achieve suspended animation in the manner of an adept, to endure the eon-long flight through fathomless abysses. He knew, too, that, assuming his voyage succeeded, he must immunize himself to the bacterial and other earthly conditions hostile to a body from Yadith. Furthermore, he must provide a way of feigning human shape on Earth until he might recover and decipher the parchment, and resume that shape in truth. Otherwise he would probably be discovered and destroyed by the people in horror as a thing that should not be. And there must be some gold, luckily obtainable on Yadith, to tide him over that period of quest. Slowly Carter's plans went forward. He provided a light-wave envelope of abnormal toughness, able to stand both the prodigious time transition and the unexampled flight through space. He tested all his calculations, and sent forth his earthward dreams again and again, bringing them as close as possible to 1928. He practiced suspended animation with marvelous success. He discovered just the bacterial agent he needed, and worked out the varying gravity stress to which he must become used. He artfully fashioned a waxen mask and loose costume enabling him to pass among men as a human being of a sort, and devised a doubly potent spell with which to hold back the dolls at the moment of his starting from the dead, black Yadith of the inconceivable future. He took care, too, to assemble a large supply of the drugs, unobtainable on Earth, which would keep his Centaur facet in abeyance till he might shed the Yadith body, nor did he neglect a small store of gold for earthly use. The starting day was a time of doubt and apprehension. Cotter climbed up to his envelope platform on the pretext of sailing for the triple star Nithon, and crawled into the sheath of shining metal. He had just room to perform the ritual of the SilverKey, and as he did so he slowly started the levitation of his envelope. There was an appalling seething and darkening of the day, and a hideous racking of pain. The cosmos seemed to reel irresponsibly, and the other constellations danced in a black sky. Below him the ground was festering with gigantic dolls. All at once Cotter felt a new equilibrium. The cold of interstellar gulf snored at the outside of his envelope, and he could see that he floated free in space, the metal building from which he had started having decayed years before. Below him the ground was festering with gigantic dolls, and even as he looked, one reared up several 100 feet and leveled a bleached, viscous end at him. But his spells were effective, and in another moment he was fallen away from Yadith, unharmed.